Some homes are built with laughter echoing through the walls, family portraits hung with care, memories etched into every corner. Mine was built out of silence, silence that followed every ignored call, every conversation cut short, every apology that never came. The walls didn't remember laughter, they remembered restraint. I didn't pick this apartment because it was the fanciest. I picked it because it was mine. Every light fixture, every chipped tile in the kitchen, even the too small balcony, I chose them. They didn't come with a memory of someone else's footsteps. They came with freedom. It was cold that night, Tacoma cold, damp, gray, and still. I was standing in my kitchen, fingers wrapped around my favorite ceramic mug, one I bought at a thrift store with a chip near the handle, the kind of flaw I found oddly charming. I had just poured myself some peppermint tea when my phone buzzed. I didn't think much of it. Most people had stopped texting after 8. But then I saw the name, Mom, and beneath it, 3 lines of text that rearranged my entire body chemistry. Give Cassiopeia the key. You'll need to leave by Sunday. It's decided. I stood there for what felt like minutes, reading it, then rereading. My thumb didn't move, my breathing didn't shift. There wasn't a rush of tears or screaming, just stillness, a kind of hush that didn't belong in any home, much less my own. They hadn't asked, they hadn't explained. They'd decided. A memory pushed itself forward. I was 17, sitting at the kitchen table trying to explain to my parents why I didn't want Elaine's old car, the one with a busted radiator and a seat that didn't lock upright. Don't be difficult, my father said. It's practical. You don't need perfect. Just say thank you. That line had followed me like a ghost. I set my mug down, carefully, deliberately. My hands were dry, the ceramic still warm. I didn't reply. I didn't throw the phone. I just walked to my bedroom, pulled out a notebook, and began listing everything I needed to back up. Documents, passwords, bills, title copies. I wasn't packing yet. I was preparing. There's a difference. By morning, the sky outside was the same washed-out gray, only this time it didn't feel peaceful. Cassiopeia arrived without knocking. Of course, her timing was always perfectly inconsiderate. She opened the door like she lived there, wheeled in a hard-shell suitcase with pink duct tape wrapped around the handle. She was on speakerphone, laughing. "Yeah, she's just crashing at Naya's," she told Elaine. "This place is basically ours now." She caught my eye as she walked past the kitchen island. "Oh, hey! Hope you don't mind me getting started early." My voice stayed behind my teeth. "What's early?" "Oh, just bringing over some stuff. Figured it's easier than moving all at once. You know how small my car is." I didn't nod. I didn't move. I just watched. She kicked off her boots, left them by the door, wet, muddy. Her tote bag landed on my couch. Then she started opening drawers. "This drawer's perfect for spices," she said, as if she'd been invited to reorganize my life. I turned toward the hallway, but caught a glimpse of her AirPods lying on my coffee table. Her phone was still on the kitchen counter. Recording was too easy. I tapped voice memos and hit record. Not because I planned to use it, but because they would. They always did. I sat at the edge of the dining chair, phone in my hand under the table. My screen lit up. Naya's message. "Do not let them rewrite this. Save everything." Cassiopeia was still talking to Elaine on the other end. Honestly, she's probably relieved. She's always been a little wound up. I moved to the bedroom, closed the door softly, and sat on the edge of my bed. I wasn't crying. My pulse wasn't racing. I was taking inventory, in my head, in my heart. They didn't break in. They were let in. They didn't ask. They assumed. And me? I wasn't surprised. I was done being surprised. I stayed in my room most of that day. Every now and then, I heard her laugh again, hear her footsteps echo through the hallway I paid for, step across the rug I bought secondhand after working double shifts for 6 weeks. That rug mattered. No one in my family would ever understand that kind of sacrifice. Later that evening, I pulled out an old journal from the bottom of my nightstand, one I hadn't opened in months. I flipped through a few pages until I landed on a sentence I wrote last spring. "They've been living rent-free in my head long before they wanted the keys to my home." I lit a candle. Not to relax, not for peace, but for ritual. Something small, controlled, intentional. This wasn't grief. It was clarity. Because here's the truth people don't tell you. Family isn't always where you feel safest. Sometimes it's where you learn to survive without being seen. I used to think being the youngest meant I had to be the most accommodating. That if I just stayed quiet, played nice, didn't need much, I'd be left alone. But they didn't leave me alone. They just took and took until there was nothing left that didn't have their fingerprints on it. That night, I lay in bed, the candle flickering down, shadows dancing on the ceiling. I could hear her through the vent, Cassiopeia, on another call, talking about rugs and cabinets and elbowing out the old vibe. My name was never mentioned. It never is, but that's okay, because I had already started making my list. They thought I was just being passive. They didn't know I'd already begun packing, but not for the reasons they think. I stepped out into the cold with the hood of my coat tugged low and my hands stuffed deep into the pockets. It wasn't even that cold, but the walk helped when I needed air, and right now I needed to breathe without wondering who might be rearranging my furniture behind my back. The neighborhood was quiet, as always, lawns trimmed, porches decorated with leftover winter wreaths, and a few folks already pulling out spring cushions for their patio chairs. Andromeda stood on her porch, watering the one potted plant that never died, no matter the season. She waved when she saw me. I nodded, about to keep walking, but she stepped off the last stair with that overly casual energy people get when they're trying to slide something into a conversation. "So," she said, drawing out the vowel, "Cassiopeia moved in with you now?" My heart didn't drop. It didn't need to. It had already sunken last night when I lay awake counting ceiling cracks instead of sheep. What landed now was something heavier, a recognition. The story had changed, and I hadn't been consulted. "She's staying temporarily," I replied, keeping my voice steady. Andromeda smiled like I'd confirmed a rumor she already believed. "She's sweet, polite, helpful. Told me the place was a family gift of sorts, kind of a transition home while they figure things out." I stared at her, carefully not blinking too long. "That's what she said," she added quickly, holding up both hands like she was just the messenger. "She even mentioned helping Elaine through some stuff. That girl's been through a lot." I managed a polite smile and walked on, ignoring the knot forming just behind my ribs. That wasn't just a miscommunication. That was messaging, strategic, layered. And the worst part? It was working. 3 years ago, I'd helped Andromeda after she slipped on her driveway and fractured her ankle. I'd fed her cats, brought her homemade soup, even collected her mail. I hadn't done it for recognition, but apparently goodwill had an expiration date, and Cassiopeia was fresher in people's minds than I was. By the time I got back to the house, I wasn't tired. I was stripped, not angry, just aware. When you don't narrate your own story, someone else will, and they'll edit you out entirely. That evening, the phone rang just as I set my tea on the table. The screen read, "Mom." I stared at it for a second longer than I usually did. Then answered. "Hi, honey," Beatrice said in that sing-song tone she reserved for manipulation disguised as affection. "Just checking in. How are things at the house?" I didn't answer that. She continued without waiting. "I know it's a lot. You know, with Cassiopeia and Elaine. They've been through so much lately. Cassiopeia's doing her best to create some stability. And Elaine, poor thing, she's finally getting her life on track." There was the setup, the guilt-layered, emotionally baited justification. "And you've always been so independent," she went on. "That's always been your gift, your strength. You've never needed much." My fingers curled slightly around the base of the mug. "I just thought, maybe this transition wouldn't be so hard on you. I knew you'd understand. It's not like you've ever really needed the space for a partner, right?" That last line hung in the air longer than any of her others. It wasn't phrased as an insult. That's what made it worse. It was delivered like an objective truth, said gently, as if she were doing me a kindness by speaking it aloud. I let her finish. Then, calmly, "Needing something and deserving it aren't the same thing, and I deserved to be asked." Silence. A beat too long. Then a brittle, "Well, of course, I was only saying." "I know exactly what you were saying," I cut in. "Thanks for checking in." I ended the call before she could reply. Sitting there, I realized that being single had become their excuse for every violation. For every, "we assumed." For every, "we thought it wouldn't be a big deal." For every time they repurposed my efforts, my space, my achievements into tools for someone else's benefit. They didn't see me as an equal. They saw me as available. And I was done being available. Later, I opened my laptop to check emails. One from a client in Oregon popped up. Quick praise about a social media campaign I'd led. "Your messaging hit exactly where it needed to," it read. "Your clarity made all the difference." I stared at the line. Clarity made all the difference. I created a folder on my desktop. Control. Evidence. I moved my scanned lease, old email chains, screenshots from Cassiopeia's live stream, and that HOA letter I never fully read into it. I took a photo of the sticky note on the fridge where Cassiopeia had written "Elaine's food only" on the top shelf. Another one of my missing throw blanket now folded neatly in Cassiopeia's room. I didn't scream. I didn't storm through the house. I just started saving things. Because the next time they tried to rewrite this story, I wouldn't argue. I'd just show them the truth. Around 8, I decided to walk to the store for groceries. The night air had that edge to it again. Winter not fully gone, but trying. I locked the door behind me, double-checked my keys. Just as I reached for the doorknob, Cassiopeia's voice floated through from inside. "Do you think she'll flip when we hang those new curtains in the living room?" Elaine laughed. My fingers stopped mid-turn. They weren't just visiting anymore. They were settling in. The apartment was quieter than usual that morning. Not peaceful, but paused. That kind of stillness you get right before a storm settles in, before something changes in a way you can't undo. I sipped my coffee from the chipped mug I refused to replace, staring out at the leafless branches outside my courtyard window. Cassiopeia's shoes were still by the door. Her scarf, damp from yesterday's rain, draped lazily over the back of the dining chair. She left her presence everywhere like breadcrumbs, only the kind that never led her home, just further into mine. I used to find comfort in mornings like this, quiet, undisturbed mine. But lately, I felt like a guest in the house I bought. I wasn't mourning lost peace. I was recognizing stolen ground. The house hadn't changed. The people in it had. And so had I. I thought about something Brené Brown once said. When we deny our stories, they define us. When we own our stories, we get to write the ending. I couldn't afford to let someone else write mine. When I was little, my mom used to say, "You're the capable one, Celine. You'll understand." That line had followed me into adulthood like a leash I never realized was around my neck. Capable. The word sounded flattering until it wasn't, until it became synonymous with invisible. That afternoon, I sat down at my desk with my laptop, took a deep breath, and opened the folder I hadn't looked at since closing day. Documents, receipts, photos, every step I'd taken to make this place mine. I clicked open the property deed. My full name, printed in clean black letters. No cosigner, no shared account, no parents listed, no Cassiopeia. Just me. The ink wasn't just on paper, it was in my bones. I remembered the year I saved for this down payment. I worked 2 jobs, early mornings at the cafe, evenings as a freelance copywriter for dental practices across the country. I skipped vacations, declined birthday dinners, said no to everything but my future. And yet, here I was, having to prove ownership of something I already owned. I hit print and watched the page slide out slowly, like proof manifesting. I pinned it to the corkboard in my room with a single silver pushpin. Let them redecorate. Let them pretend. The deed stared back at me like a crown no one could steal. Just after lunch, a notification buzzed across my screen. Naya. She sent a screenshot with the message, "Look what just popped up on Facebook." It was a group photo. Elaine, Cassiopeia, our cousin Becca, even Mom and Dad, all gathered around my kitchen island, wine glasses in hand, my dining chairs tucked neatly behind them. The caption read, "Family night at Elaine's place. So much love in this house." Elaine's place. I stared at it for longer than I cared to admit. Not because it hurt, though it did, but because it was strategic. It wasn't a typo. It wasn't an oversight. It was erasure. I scrolled through the tags. I wasn't in a single photo, though I recognized every corner of every frame. The framed art I picked up at the community fair, the fruit bowl I'd inherited from Grandma when she downsized, the light fixture I had rewired with the help of a YouTube tutorial and a prayer. I'd been outvoted in a house I bought. They weren't just moving in. They were replacing me. That night, I didn't say anything. I didn't call to confront anyone. I did what any woman who's had enough would do. I opened a blank page in my journal and wrote 3 lines. They don't see it as mine. They see it as theirs to fix her life. I'm not invited to my own space. Again, I refused to disappear quietly. I closed the journal, walked to my corkboard, and removed the pushpin from the deed. Folded it carefully, slipped it into a plastic sleeve. Then I tucked it into my handbag, just in case. I also emailed a copy to Naya, encrypted. She didn't ask why. She just responded, "Got it," backed up twice. I was no longer reacting. I was preparing. Later that evening, as I made a list of things I'd quietly start removing from the apartment, my phone buzzed again. A message from Beatrice. "Elaine's friends are coming over Saturday. Please be gracious." Gracious. That word had been weaponized in our family since I was old enough to hold a grudge. It meant, be quiet. It meant, let it go. It meant, you're not allowed to have a boundary. I looked up at the corkboard. Where the deed had hung was now a blank pinhole in the fabric. I wouldn't be here Saturday, and they wouldn't know where I'd gone. I came back from the post office around 4. Nothing urgent, just some forwarded documents I needed to collect. I was walking slower than usual, taking the long way around the block, watching the still bare trees sway like they knew something I didn't. As I reached the house, something felt off. The front door wasn't just unlocked, it was slightly ajar. That was all it took. One crack in routine and suddenly every instinct I'd learned over a lifetime kicked in. I stepped in slowly, my eyes scanning everything. The shoes were arranged differently. A candle I'd placed near the entry was gone. There was music playing faintly from the kitchen, a playlist I never created. As I set my purse on the side table, a thought I hadn't let surface until that moment hit me hard. I'd allowed this. I let them trickle into my space under the guise of family, empathy, and help. They didn't ask, they settled. They didn't suggest, they assumed. "You teach people how to treat you by what you allow," Oprah had said once in an interview I'd watched years ago. I nodded along then. Now it stung like a slap to the face. I moved toward the hallway. Something didn't feel right. The air was too empty. I reached my bedroom. The door was open. Inside, chaos hid behind the appearance of order. One of my suitcases sat beside the closet, half unzipped. Drawers were left open. My nightstand was missing the small jewelry box I'd kept since college. Gone. Framed photos I'd placed on my dresser had been replaced with generic coastal prints, the kind you buy in packs at Target when you're staging a space. My breath caught when I walked back into the hallway. My diploma, framed in gold, hung just outside my door, was gone. I turned to the balcony and stepped outside. There they were, 3 cardboard boxes, sealed, labeled, stacked neatly like I'd already packed them myself. From inside the kitchen, I heard Cassiopeia's voice. "We thought it'd be easier if we helped you start packing early." I stayed still. My hand on the balcony railing tightened. I walked back inside, keeping my steps controlled. "You're helping yourself," I said as I entered the room, voice even, measured. "Don't confuse that with generosity." Cassiopeia didn't look up from her phone. "Elaine said you were always touchy about space," she said with a shrug. I took a full breath. "And you were always good at inserting yourself into things that weren't yours," I replied, my voice low but solid. That got her attention. She turned to me, eyes narrowed. "I don't know what you're getting at." "You don't have to," I said. "Just know that I've noticed everything, and nothing you've touched will stay where it is." We stared at each other for a few seconds longer. Then I left the room. I didn't want to keep looking at her. I didn't want her face burned into the walls of the room I once called mine. That night, I sat in my room, the door locked, the noise outside dulled by the thickness of what was building inside me. I wasn't sad. I wasn't afraid. I was something new, unshakable. My phone buzzed around 9:15. Naya. She'd forwarded me screenshots from the family group chat, one I hadn't even realized I'd been removed from. Beatrice's message. She's always been difficult, never appreciated what we tried to do. Then Valorian added, let her sulk. We raised 2 daughters. One turned out grateful. I didn't move. My jaw didn't clench. My eyes didn't water. They weren't mourning me. They were mourning their ability to control me, to manipulate with guilt, to reshape the truth just enough to make themselves look generous. They always framed me as the capable one, but what they really meant was the disposable one. I typed a quick message to Naya. Keep saving these. All of them. She replied with a thumbs-up emoji and the words, already done. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't clean. I sat on the floor of my bedroom and watched the way the light from the street lamps outside crept across the hardwood. Shadows moved as the world kept turning, and I sat completely still, planning, not revenge, closure. If they won't give me a voice in this house, I whispered to myself, I'll take the roof off and let them scream into the void. I pulled out a fresh journal and uncapped my pen. Across the first page, in capital letters, I wrote, no one gets to decide what I'm worth. No one. Before heading to bed, I walked into the living room to refill my water. That's when I saw it. A folded paper on the table, cream-colored with gold accents. The heading read, Cassiopeia Elaine's housewarming brunch, Sunday at 11 a.m. The location listed was my address, so they weren't just moving in. They were celebrating their conquest. I woke before the sun. The house was quiet, but not the kind of quiet that invited calm. It was the heavy, suffocating kind that warned you something was about to shift. Something already had. There was a different energy pulsing through the walls, and it wasn't mine. As I stepped into the kitchen, I was greeted by the scent of cinnamon rolls, store-bought judging by the packaging, and the echo of Cassiopeia's laugh. Elaine chimed in from the living room, their voices bouncing off the cabinets like they owned the air itself. Catered boxes were stacked near the fridge, branded napkins peeking out the sides. I scanned the counter. Decorations, brunch cards, gift bags with tissue paper. Someone had added new cushions to the dining chairs. Subtle, but just loud enough to remind me, you're no longer the decision-maker here. I didn't say a word. Cassiopeia spotted me. Hey, Celine, we figured it was better to get everything prepped early. We wanted the place to feel welcoming. For your guests? I said flatly. Of course, Elaine called out, appearing from the hallway in a floral dress that still had the department store tag swinging at her back. It's mostly just a thank you thing, nothing formal. I walked to the sink, filling the kettle with water. As I waited, my eyes caught something near the cutting board, a printed flyer. I picked it up slowly, read every line like it was a deposition. Welcome to Elaine Cassiopeia's new journey, celebrating the next chapter in their home. Sunday, 11 a.m., Tacoma, WA. My address. Nowhere did it say, hosted by Celine. Nowhere did it suggest this was my house, my space, my life being used as a backdrop for someone else's redemption story. I remembered my own housewarming. 4 years ago. No one came. Not Mom. Not Dad. Elaine sent a late text saying she was dealing with something emotional. Cassiopeia liked the Facebook invite, but never responded. I'd ordered pizza, played records alone, toasted with a single glass of white wine, and called it done. Interesting branding, I said, waving the flyer like a red flag. Nice how my name didn't make the cut. Elaine glanced at Cassiopeia, then shrugged. It's just for the guests. People don't need all the details. Honestly, no one even thinks of this place as yours anymore. Cassiopeia added, You don't exactly advertise it. It's not like your name is on a neon sign. I felt the switch flip. Not a fiery rage, not a scream, just something cold, final, mechanical. I turned on my heel and walked to my bedroom. From under my bed, I pulled out a slim manila envelope I'd tucked there months ago. Naya had helped me verify everything inside. The scan of the forged authorization, the one Beatrice had submitted on my behalf to the HOA, backdated and signed with a signature that only resembled mine if you squinted and lied to yourself. I walked back into the kitchen and laid the envelope on the counter. Quiet. Surgical. "Let me make something clear," I said, placing both hands on the marble surface. "You've gotten far too comfortable living in delusion. Here's reality." In writing. Elaine blinked. "Celine, what?" I pulled out the printout. "This is a legal document. Forged. Submitted without my consent. And I have more." Cassiopeia looked at it, then at Elaine. "She's bluffing." "Try me," I said. I gathered the envelope, picked up my coat, and slung my bag over my shoulder. "I won't fight for space in a home I paid for," I said, calm but deadly clear. "I'll fight from where I choose to rebuild." Neither of them followed me. For the first time in this house, my exit wasn't accompanied by someone yelling my name. That silence. That was mine. I drove straight to Naya's. She opened the door before I knocked, saw the manila envelope, and simply stepped aside. "You ready?" she asked. I handed her a USB drive. Everything, scanned, time-stamped, backed up twice. We spent the next hour at her kitchen table, labeling files, drafting a list of accounts to transfer, noting names to notify, mortgage company, utility services, mail forwarding. I even drafted a formal notice to the HOA stating that no authorization could be considered valid unless delivered in person by me. As the checklist filled out, the fog that had been hanging over my head began to lift, not because I was escaping something, but because I was no longer defending something that had already been taken. "I'm not leaving because they broke me," I told Naya. "I'm leaving because I won't let them break what I'm going to build next." She nodded. "And you're not running. You're redrawing the map." That night, I sat with my laptop on Naya's couch, finalizing a relocation plan. The new place wouldn't be fancy. I didn't want views or smart fridges. I wanted doors that locked, walls that respected silence, and mailboxes that only held my name. They were downstairs right now, probably sipping mimosas, assuming I'd gone off to cool down. They didn't know this was the last brunch they'd ever host at that address. The next morning, my phone buzzed. A message from Beatrice. "We need to talk about how you embarrassed your sister in front of guests." I didn't open it. I didn't need to. Because the next conversation wasn't going to be words. It was going to be paperwork. I woke early Monday morning, the air in the apartment crisp and unnaturally still. No voices, no footsteps, no soft clinking of dishes from Cassiopeia trying to seem domesticated. Just me, a cup of half-warm coffee, and the need to finalize my departure plan with Naya. I reached for my phone to pull up the smart home app, lights, thermostat, security, all in one dashboard. But instead of the usual welcome screen, a red error blinked across the page. "Access denied. Administrator settings have changed." I tried again. Same error. At first, I thought maybe the app had glitched, but then I saw the new email listed under system notifications. Elaine. Thorne. Home at. They'd reset the master control. Every light, every lock, every sensor. No notification, no permission. Control isn't always stolen. Sometimes it's handed over, inch by inch, while you convince yourself you're just keeping the peace. That morning, peace died in silence. Around noon, Cassiopeia strolled into the kitchen in her usual oversized cardigan, hair tied up with a pen she never used for anything useful. "Oh, by the way," she said, reaching for my almond milk like it was community property. "We had a guy come over yesterday to update the system. The settings were ancient. You'll probably have to re-log into everything." I didn't blink. Didn't realize we started making those kinds of decisions. She smiled like I was being dramatic. "Elaine said you wouldn't mind. She's better with tech anyway. You're more analog." I stayed silent, walked into my bedroom, and shut the door softly behind me. Pulled out my laptop, contacted the provider, requested the back-end logs. When the forwarded activity report came in, there it was. Admin reset initiated from Elaine's email. IP address logged. Entire system handed over in a digital handoff I never approved. I added it to the growing file on my desktop labeled Legal Readiness. This wasn't just about lights and locks. This was about the systematic extraction of my authority, disguised as updates. I didn't confront them. I copied everything to an encrypted drive. I changed the passwords to my financial accounts. I moved 2 key documents to Naya's cloud. I printed fresh copies of the deed. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was documenting, strategizing. By evening, I was making tea when my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered anyway. "Hello, is this Celine Thorne?" a chipper voice asked. "Yes, speaking." "This is Denise from the HOA, just calling to verify your recent request to transfer secondary ownership on your utility billing profile. We usually get that form notarized, so just wanted to confirm." I sat up straighter. "What form?" "Oh, the form submitted last week, signed by S. Wine Thorne. It listed a new contact for billing inquiries, Cassiopeia Ellis." Sound familiar? It did. "I never signed such a form," I said evenly. "Can you send me a scanned copy?" "Sure thing. It's already in your inbox. I'll hold." I opened the email. There it was, a scanned PDF with a signature attempting to mimic mine, stylized, almost convincing. But it wasn't mine. "Denise, please consider this your formal notification that no such transfer has been authorized. Any future changes must be personally signed by me, in ink and notarized." "Understood. I'll flag the file. We'll void this request immediately." "Thank you." After hanging up, I didn't scream. I didn't rage. I opened my evidence folder and dropped the new PDF in. Forgery Attempt 2.pdf. They weren't just waiting for me to leave. They were setting the stage to erase me completely before I even packed. That night, I turned off all the lights, lit 1 candle in the kitchen, and took photos of everything I knew I would leave behind. Not for memory, for proof. If they ever claimed something was theirs, I'd have time-stamped clarity. I boxed up only what mattered: my journals, legal documents, Grandma's ceramic bowl, and the deed. Then, I uploaded everything to a new encrypted drive and sent it to Naya with a short message. "This is the final archive. Don't open unless you have to." She replied 2 minutes later. "Got it," backed up and mirrored. There's something sacred about moving quietly. It doesn't feel like surrender. It feels like reclaiming every breath you once used to ask for what was already yours. You don't need a witness to walk away from a burning bridge, just the will to keep walking and never look back. Later that evening, I sat on my bed scrolling through my inbox, doing a final cleanup before logging off for the night. That's when I saw it. A forwarded message from the property management office. Subject: Upcoming lease transfer confirmation, sent by Elaine Thorne. Message body: Elaine said you're on board with us taking over the lease fully next month. Can you confirm? No greeting, no explanation, just entitlement, brazen and assuming. I stared at the screen. They were moving faster than I thought. Good thing I was already ahead of them. It started with a phone call from Naya around 10 in the morning. I was organizing the files I downloaded the night before, sorting folders labeled legal, evidence, and personal into an external drive. Her voice was calm, too calm, controlled in that way you only manage when you're sitting on something uncomfortable. "Your mom called me this morning," she said, after the second ring of silence. My heart didn't drop, but I did sit up straighter. "She said she's worried about you, said you've been acting erratic." That word. I let it float a second before responding. "She's never called you before, has she?" I asked. "No, never," Naya admitted. "She asked if I could check in on you, said maybe you'd listen to me more than you would to her." There it was, not a direct strike, but a tactic. If they couldn't reach me, they'd lean on whoever still could. "They're not attacking me," I said quietly. "They're cutting the rope." Naya didn't argue. She knew better than most what it meant when families played chess instead of checkers. She made it sound like you're isolating, that you're unraveling. I sighed. That's the story, isn't it? I'm spiraling. Not making sense. Too emotional. The same old cocktail of dismissal and worry, served cold. Naya's voice lowered. "I told her you're not the unstable one here. I told her you're doing what any sane person would do, protecting yourself." That meant more than she probably realized. Loyalty, when tested like that, shines a lot brighter. I'll hold anything you need, she added. Flash drives, copies, records, whatever. Just say the word. I already emailed you a copy of everything, just in case. By early evening, the air had shifted again. Not tense, strategic. I checked my mail and found a bank statement I hadn't expected. It was for an old joint account, one my father opened for me when I was 17, for emergencies, he said. I'd used it briefly during college, but hadn't touched it in years. Inside the envelope, a single withdrawal stood out like a wound. $4,800 labeled, Transfer to C. Ellis, Cassiopeia. I stared at the number like it had insulted me personally. I called the bank. Yes, Ms. Thorne, the account remains joint. The other account holder, Mr. Valorian Thorne, authorized the transaction. Without my knowledge, I said, voice steady. Can you send me the request form, the timestamp, and a full transaction history from the last 6 months? The woman hesitated. We can send that over. Legally, he didn't violate any terms. No, not legally, just ethically. I'd like the account closed, effective immediately. Funds transferred to a new account in my name only, and I'll need written documentation stating the balance at the time of closure. Yes, ma'am. I'll get that started. I hung up and added the PDF receipt to my evidence folder. They never gave me money out of generosity. Thus, it was always a leash. And now that they saw I wasn't pulling anymore, they were yanking the rope. When I got back to the apartment, the first thing I saw was Cassiopeia's yoga mat unrolled in the center of the living room. Bright pink, insistent, settled. She wasn't just visiting, she was nesting. I didn't move it. I didn't touch a thing. I walked past it into my bedroom, opened a new Word document, and titled it, Intent to Vacate, with Protective Provisions. I started writing. Dates. Items left behind. Legally noted boundaries. I was done reacting. I was repositioning. You don't have to fight fire with fire, I whispered, the click of my keys keeping rhythm. Sometimes you just take away the oxygen. Late that night, I was sipping water in bed, light off, when my phone buzzed again. Elaine. Just heard you're throwing a fit over Dad helping me. I always knew you resented me. I stared at the message. I could almost hear her voice, condescending, confident, clueless. No apology, no awareness. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened a new tab, logged into my email, clicked Compose, and typed, To, real estate attorney. The group text came in at exactly 10:02 a.m. It read, Family dinner tonight. Everyone, 6 p.m. sharp. Don't be late. No name, no signature, but it didn't need one. Beatrice always had a way of barking orders as if she were reading from a wedding invitation. Syrupy, but final. I stared at the message for a beat longer than I intended to. It wasn't a request. It was a performance. One they assumed I would attend in silent compliance. But not tonight. They want me quiet, I whispered, laying my phone face down on the kitchen counter. I'm going to show them what silence sounds like when it finally speaks. I pulled out my file folder, black, weathered, but firm in the hand. Inside, printed emails, copies of the forged transfer documents, screenshots of the group chats they thought I hadn't seen, HOA correspondence, and the deed with my name on it in ink that never fades. This wasn't just paperwork. It was an indictment. I pulled a crisp blouse from the closet. Neutral, structured, wrinkle-free. I pinned my hair back in a low bun. No mascara, no blush, no adornment. Tonight wasn't about emotion. Tonight was about evidence. 3 days earlier, Naya had sent me a recording that hardened everything inside me. She'd been added to a Zoom call by mistake, another Thorne oversight, thinking she was someone else in the E-list. But instead of leaving, she hit screen record and listened. Beatrice. She'll come around. She's never been confrontational. Valorian. We just have to stay firm. She's always needed structure. Elaine. Honestly, she's just sentimental about that place. She'll fold like always. Cassiopeia laughed. As long as we keep the optics clean, she won't push back. Naya had sent the file with a note that read, They're not just planning a takeover. They've rehearsed your silence. At 5:55 p.m., I parked across the street from my parents' house. The porch light was already on. Inside, I could see shadows move behind the window shears. I took one last look at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My lips didn't tremble. My hands didn't shake. By 6 o'clock, I was standing in the doorway. Elaine greeted me first, all false cheer. "Look who decided to show up!" Cassiopeia followed with a half smile. "We weren't sure if you got the message." "I got it," I said. Beatrice waved me in with a dish towel. "Dinner's almost ready. Why don't you sit down?" I walked to the table, folder still in hand. I didn't sit. Not yet. Valorian poured himself a glass of wine and cleared his throat. "Let's eat, shall we?" "I'm not here to eat," I said. "I'm here to clarify something." The room fell into a hush. You could hear the air conditioner click off. "There will be no more discussions about my home," I said. "And here's why." I laid the folder on the table, opened it slowly, and slid the first document across the surface. The deed. My name. No co-owners. Next, the HOA email chain revealing the unauthorized transfer attempt. Then, the forged signature on the billing transfer form Beatrice had filed, her version of helping. No one moved. Beatrice blinked once. "Celine, I don't think—" "No, you didn't think, that's the problem," I interrupted, voice steady. "You acted illegally." Elaine stammered. "It's not like we were selling it, we just needed some flexibility." Cassiopeia rolled her eyes. "You're blowing this way out of proportion. You live alone. You don't need all that space." "I'll decide what I need," I said, louder now. "And I will decide who's allowed to set foot in what I pay for." Valorian, always the calm one, tried to smooth things over. "Let's all just cool down. This is still family. We can find a solution." "I already did," I replied. "This folder is the solution. And I have more. All admissible. All backed up." I pulled out a printed memo from my lawyer. I read aloud, "Any further attempts to assign, occupy, or discuss the property without my signed approval will be met with legal consequence." I returned the document to the folder and looked up at the 4 people who had always assumed I'd never raise my voice unless someone was bleeding. No one touched their food. The silence that followed wasn't stunned. It was calculating. This was the moment they realized the rules had changed. For once, I saw fear, not of court, but of inconvenience, of losing access to the life they'd tried to repurpose in their name. I tucked the folder under my arm. "Thank you for dinner," I said. "I won't be staying." No one followed me out. I drove home under streetlights that flickered like applause. When I pulled into the driveway, my phone buzzed. Naya. Text. "How'd it go?" I typed. "It's done." They finally heard me without raising my voice. For weeks, I hadn't slept through a single night. But that night, I didn't just sleep. I rested. The next morning, a new email arrived from Valorian. Subject line, "We didn't expect you to go that far." The body read, "You made your point." I didn't open it. I labeled the thread evidence and archived it. The point wasn't to make them see, it was to make them stop acting like I couldn't. The silence after that dinner wasn't the kind you celebrate. It wasn't peace. It was recalibration. No calls, no texts, no follow-up inquiries disguised as concern. Just quiet. It reminded me of the stillness after a blizzard. Everything appears calm, but there's no warmth left in the snow. They weren't sorry. They were stunned. That's what made the silence dangerous. Beatrice, Valorian, Elaine, and Cassiopeia weren't retreating out of respect. They were regrouping, figuring out how the plan unraveled under a single folder, and my refusal to play along. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the spot where Cassiopeia once rolled out her yoga mat like a claim of ownership. I thought about a quote from Maya Angelou I'd underlined in a book years ago. "When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time." I had spent years believing what I hoped they were. Now, I believed what I'd seen. That evening, I came home from work and saw a small pile of party supplies near the door. Napkins with gold trim, a few crumpled paper fans, and a bag of unused disposable champagne flutes. There was a note stuck to one box in someone else's handwriting. Sorry we missed you. Such a lovely space. Can't wait to visit again. Candace, Cass's cousin. Underneath that, a line scribbled in different ink. Wait, isn't this still Elaine's place? I didn't react, not externally. I unlocked the door, stepped in, and smelled the aftertaste of something sugary and stale. Cake, maybe. I turned on the lights and scanned the room. The countertops were sticky. My wine glasses, ones I kept for clients and rare visitors, sat on the drying rack, spotted and still wet. Someone had left a Bluetooth speaker connected, quietly pulsing music from a party playlist. Cassiopeia had hosted a goodbye brunch while I was at work. In my house, without saying a word, I didn't shout. I walked calmly to the hallway closet, pulled out the flash drive I'd kept tucked beneath old scarves, and plugged it into my laptop. The saved footage from my security camera showed a dozen people milling through the living room, some taking selfies, others walking down my hallway like it was a museum tour. No one looked like they belonged, but they'd celebrated as if they did. That was all the permission I needed. The next day, I met my real estate agent at a quiet cafe off 6th Avenue. She greeted me with a smile that wasn't overly friendly, just competent, focused, all business. "We're ready," she said, sliding the folder across the table. "The listing's up privately. The location's competitive. I wouldn't be surprised if we had offers by next week." "I'm not in a rush," I replied. She tilted her head. "That's rare." "I've already left," I said. "The paperwork's just catching up." She understood. Some people do. We reviewed the sale documents, disclosure forms, the agent's commission structure, and logistics for the key exchange. My name, printed cleanly on every page, reminded me this place had always belonged to me, even when others pretended otherwise. I signed the final form and handed it back without hesitation. They wanted to take my home, I thought to myself, so I took the ground under their feet. I didn't tell anyone, not Naya, not the group chat I'd muted, not even my therapist. Some victories don't require applause, just silence. That night, I sat at the dining table, now almost bare except for a single plate of takeout from the Thai restaurant I used to treat myself to once a month. I used to eat at that table hunched over my laptop, typing emails while eating noodles. Now, I ate slowly. I thought back to the first night I moved in. No furniture yet, just a sleeping bag on the hardwood floor and a leftover sandwich from the corner deli. I'd felt peace then. That kind of quiet that made the world feel distant and soft. Funny how I'd come full circle. Different woman, same solitude. I sent Naya a single message. "It's done. I feel still." She replied with a heart emoji, nothing else. That was enough. Later that night, I started browsing rental listings. Not luxury condos, not lakefront properties, just places with clean walls, working locks, and my name on the mailbox. I wasn't looking for an upgrade. I was looking for a beginning without a backstory. Just before bed, my phone vibrated with a new email alert. Subject: Showing request, 212 Grove Street. Sender: no reply at agentportal.com. I clicked. Inquiry received for showing at 212 Grove Street, requested by Beatrice Thorne. My lips parted slightly, not in surprise, but in acknowledgement. Let them walk through the space. Let them step into the echo of what they tried to steal. It's the closest they'll ever get to owning me again. Thursday night started with a simple click. I opened my laptop to review a few emails and prep client notes, but instead, the first thing that caught my eye was a video someone had tagged me in. Accidentally, I assumed. The thumbnail was unmistakable. Elaine, standing in my kitchen, smiling into the camera, framed by the backsplash I installed with my own 2 hands. The title read, "Officially moved into the dream space thanks to family." My breath didn't hitch, my shoulders didn't tense. I didn't even blink. The emotion I felt was no longer disappointment. It was verification. They weren't just borrowing anymore. They were branding it. I hit play. Elaine's voice filled the speakers, warm and bubbly. "Welcome, everyone. We are so excited to finally have a place that feels like ours. After everything, this just means so much. The camera moved around the room, my room, pointing out our little sanctuary. The corner reading nook Elaine claimed she'd always dreamed of. The throw blanket across the couch was one I got from a flea market in Portland. The coffee table was something I built myself during lockdown. Everything familiar was now presented as part of someone else's narrative. In the comment section, people gushed, "So cozy! You two deserve this." Finally, a space that reflects your hard work. Cassiopeia had even replied, "It's about time people saw how hard Elaine worked for this." I didn't flinch. I copied the video link into my evidence folder. I screenshotted the comments, the tags, the number of shares. I reported the video for impersonation, not because I wanted it taken down, but because I needed the report filed. Proof of intention. There was no need for confrontation anymore, only documentation. Friday afternoon, I stopped by my parents' house to pick up some stray mail. No one knew I was coming. I let myself in, greeted only by the faint smell of pot roast reheated too many times. The living room had changed. Where there used to be a wall of family photos, me in braces, high school graduation, our old Labrador, there was now a curated collection of Elaine and Cassiopeia in their home. Candids of brunch, selfies from the couch, a posed picture of them clinking wine glasses under the pendant lights I paid to have installed. My photos were gone. Every single one. I glanced at the side table. There, nearly hidden beneath an old stack of magazines, was a small portrait of me as a child, tucked away, dust collecting on the glass. Beatrice walked in from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She saw where my gaze landed. "We had to shift things to reflect what's current," she said, not unkindly, but not kindly either. I turned to face her. "You erase the past to justify the present. That doesn't make it less mine." She opened her mouth, probably to spin something, but I was already walking to the door. I didn't take the mail. I didn't need it anymore. Later that evening, back at my nearly packed apartment, I received an email from my real estate agent. Subject, offer accepted. The message was short. "Buyer has wired deposit, ready to proceed. Congrats." I read it twice, not to confirm it was real, but to feel the finality of it. They'd stolen my reflection, but they never owned my name. I pulled out the moving boxes and started wrapping the few items that still held meaning. My grandmother's porcelain teacup, the brass key I kept from my first job's office, a dried bouquet Naya had given me on my birthday last year. I wasn't packing in defeat. I was curating what deserved to come forward with me. Each item folded in newspaper felt like a full sentence in a paragraph that said, "I decide what stays." They expected me to beg for peace. Instead, I signed them out of the story. Just after 9 p.m., my phone buzzed, voicemail from Elaine. Her voice came through, sharp with disbelief. "I saw your name on a public record." "You really sold it. You actually— Celine, are you insane? We had plans." I deleted the voicemail without listening to the rest. Some things aren't announcements. They're exits. Saturday morning arrived without ceremony. I brewed coffee slowly, not because I was savoring it, but because I had nowhere to be, and no one to answer to. The apartment was still and clean, the boxes I hadn't unpacked stacked neatly against the wall. For the first time in months, I didn't feel watched or monitored or anticipated. I opened my laptop out of habit, not urgency. The inbox refreshed. Most were newsletters, order confirmations. But then, at the top, a message from Aunt Thisbe. Subject line, "Checking in." I didn't click it. I didn't need to. She was parroting Beatrice. I could feel it from the ellipsis. That passive-aggressive softness they all mastered when they were about to say something venomous dressed in pearls. "You're not required to set yourself on fire to keep others warm," I whispered to myself, archiving the message without another thought. Then, out loud, as if announcing it to the silence around me, "I'm done explaining my piece." Naya had warned me the whispers would come, and they had. Screenshots, forwarded messages, group chats I hadn't known I'd been kicked out of until they needed to discuss me instead of with me. "Celine's been different lately. I think she's going through something. I heard she canceled the family trust meeting. Maybe she's burned out." A familiar narrative, polished and reshaped to justify their discomfort with my absence. Beatrice had floated the idea of therapy, not as a suggestion, but as a weapon. "We're all just concerned," she told someone, probably Thisbe. "She's been isolating. She's unpredictable. It might help if someone talks to her professionally." It always starts with concern until the concern becomes the basis for dismissal. I didn't deny that therapy helped me. What I rejected, fiercely, was its weaponization. "I was always too stable to control," I wrote in my journal that morning. "So now they call me broken." I didn't respond to any of them, but I documented every word. And then, that afternoon, came the next blow. A text from Elaine. Long. Emotional. Barbed. "You've always been jealous of me," she wrote. "Admit it. You never wanted me to succeed. You pretended to support me while quietly resenting every time someone paid attention to me instead of you. You're bitter, Celine, spiteful. And maybe that's why you're alone." I read it once, then again, slowly, not to absorb the insult, but to measure its weight. This wasn't rage. This was projection. She mistook my silence for superiority. She never saw the sacrifices, like the time she dropped out of her second grade program and I covered her phone bill so she wouldn't lose service while figuring herself out. I never told anyone. I never used it as leverage. But she'd decided the story was simpler if I were the villain. And I took a screenshot, saved it under elainefinal.txt, and dropped it in my legal evidence folder. Then, with no ceremony, I deleted the conversation. Not out of anger, out of finality. Just before sunset, I walked the Ruston Way waterfront, the breeze brushing against my skin like an exhale I didn't know I'd held. Families passed with strollers and dogs. Cyclists whizzed by. I walked until the harbor lights glimmered. I sat on a bench and watched the water shift, blue to gray to almost black. What I had lost, an apartment, a role, a perceived family dynamic, didn't feel heavy anymore. What remained was quieter, but stronger. Agency, clarity, peace. I pulled out my phone and texted Naya. "They think I'm cutting them off," I wrote. "But really, I'm cutting the cord they used to hang me with." She replied with one word, "Exactly." For the first time in months, I didn't feel cut off. I felt sovereign. That night, back at the apartment, I received one last notification. Subject, closing confirmation, 212 Grove Street. Message, your listing has officially closed. Final payment processed. Welcome to your next chapter. I stared at the screen, then smiled. I whispered it out loud to no one. Good. Now I can leave everything. Legally and emotionally. The sun was just starting to peek over the rooftops when I woke. My apartment was nearly bare. One chair, one plant I'd managed to keep alive longer than any relationship, and my overnight bag zipped and leaning against the door. The walls looked lighter without pictures. The space, once weighed down with other people's assumptions, now breathed without obligation. I walked the apartment slowly, room by room, not searching for items, just permission to leave them behind. I ran my hand over the windowsill in the living room where I used to sit with my morning tea, watching the seasons pass through condensation. The light came in sharp and clean, as if it too was ready to move on. I set the keys and a copy of the deed on the counter inside a plain envelope. On the front, I wrote in simple pen, "You never asked, so here's the answer." They wanted access. I gave them absence. And then, without a single backward glance, I walked out. Outside, a couple stood beside the gate, their expressions curious but kind. "You must be Celine," the woman said, reaching out. I nodded, extending my hand. "You must be the new owners." "We are," she said. "We're so grateful you chose us. It feels like this place has good bones." I smiled softly. "It has better boundaries now." We shook hands. I passed them the mailbox key. They didn't ask about who used to live here. They didn't bring up the past. They only looked forward. As they turned the key and walked into what was now their future, I got in my car and sat for a moment. I opened my phone, tapped the app for the security system, and deleted it without hesitation. "They don't know I already left," I murmured. And that's the kind of freedom they'll never understand. The road to my new place was familiar, but I let myself get a little lost on purpose. I took the long way, past the park where I used to sketch, the gas station where I once met a stranger who bought me coffee just because he liked my boots. This city had bruised me, but I'd be damned if I let it own me. At a red light, I opened the group text with Beatrice, Valorian, Elaine, and Cassiopeia. No response needed. Just one message. Don't worry about the key. It's not your place anymore. I hit send. The replies came fast. Elaine, you did this to humiliate us. Beatrice, this was a family matter. You've turned it into a statement. Valorian didn't text. He never did when he wasn't in control. I screenshot everything, saved it to a folder labeled Archive Final, then muted the thread. For good, they used silence to erase me. I used one sentence to end the cycle. I arrived at the new place just before noon, a quiet unit in a modest building, not flashy, but full of light, with neighbors who didn't know my last name or my family's history. The kind of anonymity that felt earned, not lonely. I carried in one box, labeled in permanent marker, only what matters. Inside, the photo of my grandmother holding me at 3 years old. A pressed flower Naya once tucked into a birthday card, my journal, my favorite coffee mug. I hung 3 prints on the wall, my photography for the first time, art I'd never shared. The frame was crooked, but I smiled anyway. Naya arrived an hour later with Thai food and a bottle of wine. We christened this space with noodles and cheap Pinot, she said, dropping the bag on the floor as we sat on cushions. We talked for hours, not about the past, just about next steps, next clients, next books to read. Nothing revolutionary, just normal. This, I said between bites, is what healing looks like. Naya raised her glass. Not perfect, just peaceful, I finished. As the night wound down, I opened my laptop one last time. The webcam light flicked on. I leaned in, speaking directly into the frame. No makeup, no lighting crew, just me. To anyone who's ever been told they owe their silence, your voice is worth more than their comfort. I didn't need to cry. I didn't need to rant. I needed only to finish the sentence. I closed the laptop, pulled out my journal, and wrote one line across the page. They don't need to understand. I just need to live.